Savannah raised her glass, her oversized diamond ring, catching the overhead lights of the country club ballroom, and mocked me for still being single in front of 50 of our parents' wealthiest friends. My mother, Beatrice, didn't stop her. In fact, she offered a tight, supportive smile as if Savannah was doing me a favor by pointing out my failures. I'm Miranda. I'm 33. And for years, I was the invisible daughter, the one who worked quiet hours as an art restorer while Savannah played the role of the golden child. I just sat there, my hands shaking under the linen tablecloth, feeling the familiar sting of being the family punching bag. My father, Gregory, stared intently at his steak, refusing to meet my eyes as he always does when the bullying starts. Savannah leaned in, her voice dripping with that syrupy, fake concern she's perfected. Don't worry, Miranda, she chirped loudly enough for the next table to hear. Maybe someone will overlook your dusty career eventually. That was the breaking point. I didn't cry, and I didn't scream. Instead, I reached into my designer leather bag, pulled out my tablet, and set it firmly on the table. The room froze as the screen lit up with a document that changed everything. My sister's face went pale, the smirk vanishing instantly, because she knew exactly what I was about to reveal, and it wasn't just about my relationship status. It was about the thousands of dollars she'd been stealing from our parents while they cheered for her. Before I reveal the secret that tore my family apart forever, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't believe how far a sibling will go to protect a lie. Now, let's get back to the moment the table went silent. The grand ballroom of the country club smelled of expensive lilies and the underlying scent of old money, a stark contrast to the bitterness radiating from my sister. Savannah Franklin sat directly across from me, her posture perfect, basking in the glow of my mother's undivided attention. For 3 decades, this had been the natural order of things in our household. My mother, Beatrice, spent her days curating Savannah's image, from the beauty pageants of her childhood to her current status as a lifestyle influencer with a penchant for luxury. I was merely the shadow in the background, the practical daughter whose career in art restoration was dismissed as playing with dust during family dinners. Beatrice adjusted her pearl necklace, her eyes shimmering with pride as she looked at her youngest child. You know, Gregory, she said to my father. Savannah's latest campaign with that jewelry brand is just the beginning. She's bringing so much prestige to our family name. My father, Gregory Franklin, nodded silently, his habitual retreat into the safety of his wine glass leaving me exposed to the inevitable shift in conversation. He had spent 40 years avoiding conflict, a trait that effectively sanctioned the emotional erosion Beatrice and Savannah inflicted on me. It's a shame, really. Savannah sighed, her voice projecting just enough to reach the neighboring tables occupied by the city's social elite. I offered to help Miranda find a stylist for tonight, but she insisted on wearing, well, whatever that is. She gestured vaguely at my vintage silk dress, a piece I had carefully restored myself. A few guests nearby chuckled politely, and I felt the heat rise in my neck. This wasn't just a dinner. It was a performance designed to reinforce my status as the family's second-class citizen. I watched Beatrice beam at Savannah, ignoring the way her words cut through me. My mother had a unique ability to weaponize silence, never correcting Savannah's cruelty but always amplifying her praise. Throughout my 20s, I had driven 5 hours every month to attend their functions, sleeping on a lumpy guest room sofa and listening to hours of lectures about why I should be more like my sister. Not once had Beatrice asked about the gallery I managed or the master's degree I had earned with honors. As the first course was cleared, Savannah leaned forward, her eyes glittering with a predatory sort of joy. She loved an audience, and tonight she had 50 of them. Mom was just telling me how worried she is about your future, Miranda. Since you're still so very much alone in Seattle, we were thinking of setting you up with our accountant's nephew. He's twice divorced, but at this stage, we can't be too picky, can we? The cruelty was so casual, so practiced, that it felt like a physical blow. Beatrice reached out to pat Savannah's hand, a gesture of approval that felt like a betrayal. We just want you to be settled, dear, my mother added, though her eyes remained cold. It's hard for people to take a woman seriously when she's just drifting. I looked at Gregory, hoping for a spark of defense, but he was busy discussing golf handicaps with a man to his left. The weight of their collective indifference had finally become too heavy to carry. I realized then that my presence here wasn't about celebrating their 30-year marriage. It was about providing a contrast for Savannah's perceived perfection. They needed me to be the failure so that she could remain the star. I took a slow breath, the air in the ballroom feeling thin, and adjusted the bag resting against my chair. The digital files I had spent months gathering were waiting, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the fallout. As the prime rib was served on gold-rimmed china, the air grew thick with a tension only Savannah could ignite. She adjusted the napkin on her lap, making sure the light from the crystal chandeliers hit the massive rock on her finger just right. Anyway, the reason I've been so busy lately isn't just the modeling, she announced, her voice rising to capture the attention of everyone within a 3-table radius. I've finally found the perfect estate in Greenwich. It's a 5-bedroom colonial with a pool house and a private orchard. I'm closing on it next month. Beatrice gasped, her hands flying to her chest in a theatrical display of motherly pride. Oh, Savannah, Greenwich? That's the most exclusive zip code in the state. I knew you were doing well, but a multi-million-dollar estate at 28? You've certainly outdone us all. My mother's eyes flickered toward me for a split second, a silent judgment that said, see what your sister can do while you're still renting a studio in Seattle? It's a lot of responsibility, Savannah continued, leaning back with a smug expression. But I really wanted to be closer to you, and Dad. In fact, I'm planning to have a dedicated suite just for you two, so you never have to worry about where you'll spend your golden years. She turned her gaze to me, her smile sharpening into a blade. I'd offer you a room too, Miranda, but I know how much you value your independence. Besides, I don't think my interior designer would know what to do with all that old dusty furniture you're always fixing. I took a slow sip of water, the cool liquid doing nothing to soothe the fire burning in my chest. That's a very ambitious purchase, Savannah, I said, my voice remarkably steady, especially considering the current interest rates for jumbo loans. I assume you're putting down a substantial deposit to avoid the private mortgage insurance? The table went quiet for a heartbeat. Savannah's eyes narrowed, her grip tightening on her wine glass. Of course I am. I've been saving for years. Unlike some people who spend their paychecks on vintage rags and overpriced coffee. I don't need financial advice from an art restorer, Miranda. I wasn't giving advice, I replied, setting my glass down with a deliberate click against the table. I was just surprised. Last I heard, the influencer market was cooling down. It's impressive that you can afford a $3 million home and still have enough left over to, say, help Mom and Dad with their retirement fund. Beatrice frowned, clearly annoyed that I was stepping into Savannah's spotlight. Miranda, don't be cynical. Your sister is being incredibly generous. She's even offered to help us manage our portfolio since your father is tired of dealing with the brokers. My father, Gregory, cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable as he stared at his plate. Well, she's been very helpful with the paperwork, Miranda. She's tech-savvy. It's easier for her to handle the online transfers than it is for us. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The pieces were starting to fit together, the help Savannah was providing, the sudden wealth, and the way she had been isolating them from me for months. She wasn't just bragging, she was building a fortress of lies to hide the fact that she was drowning. I looked at Savannah, seeing the slight tremor in her hand as she reached for her glass. She was terrified I knew something, and she was right to be. I just find it interesting, I added, my voice dropping to a near whisper that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Because I saw a very similar property listed in the foreclosure notices last week. The buyer's name was redacted, but the circumstances were familiar. Savannah's face drained of color, her perfect mask finally starting to crack under the pressure of my gaze. She opened her mouth to snap back, but the waiter arrived to clear the plates, providing a temporary reprieve from the storm that was about to break. Savannah's laughter was sharp, a jagged sound that sliced through the clinking of silverware at the surrounding tables. Foreclosure? Really, Miranda? You're so desperate to bring me down that you're hallucinating legal notices now? She turned to Beatrice, her eyes brimming with fake tears. Mom, do you see what I have to deal with? I try to share my success with this family, and she tries to drag me into the mud. It's pathetic. Beatrice slammed her hand onto the table, the gold-rimmed china rattling. Enough, Miranda. Your jealousy is officially ruining this anniversary. You've done nothing but sit there and judge your sister since you arrived. If you can't be happy for Savannah's achievements, then perhaps you should have stayed in that dusty little workshop of yours in Seattle. My mother's voice was a whip, meant to draw blood, but for the first time in my life, the sting didn't last. I set my silver fork down with a deliberate click, the sound echoing in the brief silence. I'm not jealous, Mom, I'm concerned, and as for my dusty workshop, I think it's time we cleared a few things up. I leaned back, looking directly at the woman who had spent 30 years making me feel small. I haven't been drifting for the last year. I've been busy, not just restoring 17th century oils, but expanding my own consultancy firm. I've been working with some of the largest architectural firms in the Pacific Northwest, including the one owned by my husband. The word husband hit the table like a lead weight. Savannah froze, her wine glass halfway to her lips. Beatrice blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Even Gregory finally looked up from his plate, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. Husband, my father whispered, the first word he'd spoken directly to me all night. Miranda, what on earth are you talking about? I've been married for 14 months. Dad, I said, my voice cool and professional. His name is Julian. He's a lead architect at a firm I consult for. We had a small, private ceremony in Seattle last spring. It was exactly what we wanted, no drama, no grand ballrooms, just two people who actually respect each other. Savannah found her voice first, though it was an octave higher than usual. You're lying. You're just making this up because I told everyone you were single. Where's the ring? Where's the wedding photos? You don't have a husband, Miranda. You have a cat and a vivid imagination. She looked around at the guests, seeking validation for her mockery. She's literally inventing a life to compete with me. I don't compete with you, Savannah. I outgrew that years ago, I replied, reaching for the leather bag resting against my chair. I didn't wear my ring tonight because I knew exactly how you and Mom would react. You'd find a way to make it about you, or you'd criticize Julian before you even met him. But since you're so worried about my imagination, I pulled out my tablet and tapped the screen, turning it toward the center of the table. A high-resolution photo appeared. Julian and I standing on a cliffside at sunset, our rings glinting, both of us looking genuinely happy in a way I never was in this house. Below the photo was a digital copy of our marriage certificate, filed in King County, Washington. Julian is the reason I'm here tonight, I continued, my gaze shifting to Beatrice. He encouraged me to give this family one last chance. He thought maybe, just maybe, you'd be happy for me if you knew I'd found a partner who supports my career and my life. But I see now that he was being optimistic. You don't want me to be happy. You want me to be the benchmark for Savannah's supposed perfection. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. The guests at the nearby tables were no longer pretending not to listen, they were staring openly. Savannah's face was no longer pale, it was a mottled, angry red. She looked at the tablet as if it were a ticking bomb, realizing that the narrative she'd spent the evening building was crumbling in front of everyone who mattered to her. The silence in the dining room was heavy, a suffocating blanket that even the distant sound of a jazz band in the lobby couldn't pierce. Savannah stared at the marriage certificate on my tablet, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. This doesn't prove anything, she hissed, her voice trembling as she tried to regain her footing. So you got married in secret. That just proves how little you care about this family, Miranda. You didn't even invite your own parents to your wedding. Mom, Dad, do you see? She's been living a double life and excluded us entirely. Beatrice's face hardened, the shock of the photo quickly curdling into indignation. She's right, Miranda. To keep something like that from us. After everything we've done for you, it's the ultimate disrespect. You let us think you were struggling and alone while you were off playing house with some stranger. My mother's voice was cold, her disappointment a familiar weapon she'd used against me since I was a child. I didn't flinch. I had expected this reaction, the immediate shift from you're a loser to you're a traitor. I reached into my leather bag again, pulling out a slim, manila folder cap chutning terfiuguri hang. I expected you to say that, Mom, which is why I brought these. I slid a stack of 5 certified mail receipts across the white tablecloth, stopping right in front of my father. Those are tracking numbers and signature confirmations for 5 separate packages I sent to this house over the last year, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. The first was an announcement of our engagement. The second was a formal invitation to our wedding in Seattle, with a paid flight and hotel voucher included. The others were photos, a holiday card, and a letter explaining why I wanted you there. Gregory picked up the top receipt, his hands shaking as he adjusted his glasses. I never saw these, Miranda. I check the mail every day. We never received anything from Washington. That's because you weren't the one signing for them, Dad, I replied, my gaze shifting to Savannah, who was now visibly trembling. Look at the signature line on every single one of those slips. It's not your handwriting. It's not Mom's. It's a very distinctive S followed by a flourish that Savannah uses on all her fan mail. The color drained from Savannah's face until she looked like a ghost under the ballroom lights. I thought they were just junk mail. Influencer packages. I get so many deliveries. I must have just signed for them without looking and then misplaced them. Misplaced 5 separate certified packages over 12 months? I challenged, tapping a button on my tablet to bring up a new screen. And I suppose you misplaced the settings on Mom and Dad's phones too? Because 3 months ago, when I realized my calls weren't going through, I flew down here while you were at a photo shoot in Miami. I hired a private investigator to look into why my digital footprint was being erased from this house. I scrolled through a series of screenshots on the tablet records of Savannah's IP address, accessing our family's shared cloud account to delete my emails, and a log from my mother's phone showing my number had been manually moved to the blocked list on 4 different occasions. You didn't just miss my wedding, Mom. You were systematically blocked from even knowing it was happening, I said, looking Beatrice in the eye. Savannah didn't want me here. She didn't want you to know I was successful, or happy, or married to a man who makes more in a month than she makes in a year. She needed to keep me as the family failure so you'd keep feeding her ego and your bank accounts into her failing lifestyle. The guests at the nearby tables were leaning in now, the drama of the night far surpassing any anniversary toast they had expected. Savannah looked around like a cornered animal, her perfect, manicured life disintegrating with every swipe of my finger on that screen. She opened her mouth to scream, to deny, but the evidence was staring back at her in black and white, verified by the very technology she claimed to master. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Savannah's face was no longer the picture-perfect image of a successful influencer. It was a mottled, angry red, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit that didn't exist. "You're crazy, Miranda," she finally shrieked, her voice cracking in the quiet ballroom. "You've always been obsessed with me. You're making up these elaborate stories to justify why you weren't invited to anything. Mom, don't listen to her. She's jealous of my new house, my career, everything." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I simply swiped to the next folder on my tablet, the one labeled financial discrepancies. "I'm not obsessed with you, Savannah. I'm concerned about our parents' future. Because while you were busy telling everyone you were closing on a multi-million-dollar estate in Greenwich, you were actually busy draining Dad's $401k. My father, Gregory, froze, his wine glass halfway to his lips. "What are you talking about, Miranda? That account is secure. I check the statements every quarter. Do you, Dad? Or does Savannah help you check them on your iPad?" I asked, my voice dripping with a cold, hard truth. I tapped a document on the screen and slid the tablet toward him. It was a series of withdrawal authorizations from the last 6 months, totaling over $150,000. Every single one of them had been processed digitally, originating from an IP address that matched Savannah's home office. "Look at the digital signatures, Dad," I continued, pointing to the pixelated script at the bottom of the forms. "It looks like your handwriting. But if you zoom in, you can see the repetitive patterns of a scanned and pasted image. She didn't even bother to forge a new one each time. She just used the signature from your 2022 tax return." Beatrice let out a sharp, choked sound, her hand flying to her throat. "Savannah? Tell her she's lying. Tell her you didn't touch your father's retirement fund." Savannah didn't answer. She couldn't. She was staring at the tablet with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. The guests at the surrounding tables were now whispering openly, their faces a mix of shock and morbid fascination. The golden child of the Franklin family was being dismantled in front of the very people she spent her life trying to impress. "And it's not just the retirement fund," I added, my gaze shifting back to my sister. "I know about the credit card debt, Savannah. I know about the 3 different lifestyle companies you started that went bankrupt within 6 months because you were using the investment capital to buy designer handbags and first-class tickets to Paris. You aren't buying a house in Greenwich. You're facing a foreclosure on your current condo because you haven't paid the mortgage in 4 months." I pulled out a final sheet of paper from my folder, a copy of a legal notice addressed to Savannah Franklin regarding a breach of contract for a high-end jewelry brand. "They're suing you for $50,000 because you never posted the content they paid for. You spent the money on a down payment for a car you can't afford to insure. You bitch," Savannah screamed, lunging across the table toward me. Gregory caught her arm, his face pale and etched with a sudden, devastating realization. He looked at the tablet, then at his youngest daughter, and for the first time in 30 years, the fog of favoritism seemed to lift. "Is this true?" my father whispered, his voice shaking with a mixture of grief and anger. "Savannah, did you take that money? That was our safety net. That was for your mother's medical expenses if something happened." Savannah collapsed back into her chair, her bravado finally shattered. She didn't deny it this time. She just buried her face in her hands and started to sob, not out of regret, but out of the sheer, panicked realization that the game was finally over. The room went ice cold as the reality of her betrayal sank in, leaving my parents standing in the wreckage of a life they thought was perfect. My mother's fork hit the floor with a sharp, metallic clang that seemed to echo forever in the stunned silence of the ballroom. For a moment, I thought Beatrice was going to faint, her face a ghostly shade of white as she stared at the sobbing mess that was her favorite daughter. But then, her eyes snapped toward me, and the shock was replaced by a familiar, searing rage. "How could you, Miranda?" she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "To bring these private family matters into a public celebration. To humiliate your sister in front of everyone. We know. You've always been cold, but this is pure malice." Beatrice reached out and pulled Savannah's shaking shoulders into a protective embrace, ignoring the papers scattered across the table. "So, she made some mistakes. She's young. She's under immense pressure to maintain her career. You're her sister. You should have come to us privately instead of staging this ambush. You're trying to destroy her life just because you've lived a boring one." "She didn't make mistakes, Mom. She committed grand larceny," I countered, my voice flat and devoid of the emotion she wanted to provoke. "She stole from Dad's future to fund a lifestyle she couldn't afford. And she did it while systematically erasing me from your lives so you wouldn't have anyone else to turn to when the money ran out. It doesn't matter." Beatrice shrieked, her voice finally breaking. "We are a family. We handle things behind closed doors. You've ruined our reputation tonight. Do you have any idea what people are going to say tomorrow? You've turned our 30th anniversary into a circus. The reputation was already a lie, Beatrice. A new voice cut through the tension, sharp, elderly, and utterly unimpressed. My Aunt Martha, Gregory's older sister, stood up from the next table. She had always been the black sheep of the family because she refused to play along with my mother's social climbing games. She walked over, her cane clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. I've been sitting here listening to you defend a thief while berating the daughter who actually tried to warn you, Martha said, looking directly at my mother. I told Gregory months ago that the numbers didn't add up. I saw Savannah at the casino in Atlantic City when she was supposed to be at a business conference. She was throwing around $100 bills like they were candy. Gregory looked up at his sister, his eyes clouded with a deep, haunting regret. You saw her there, Martha? Why didn't you tell me directly? I tried, Gregory, Martha replied with a sad smile. But every time I called the house, Savannah answered. She told me you were too sick to talk, or that you and Beatrice were on a cruise. She played us all like a professional con artist. She turned to me, placing a weathered hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, Miranda. They wouldn't have listened to a whisper, so you had to give them a shout. Savannah looked up from her mother's chest, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face. You're all against me. It was supposed to be my time. I was going to pay it back once the Greenwich deal went through. There was no Greenwich deal, Savannah, I said, leaning forward. There was only a mountain of lies, and my father's empty bank account. You didn't just steal money, you stole their security. And Mom, the fact that you're still holding her while glaring at me tells me everything I need to know about where I stand in this family. The guests were starting to stand up, the spectacle becoming too uncomfortable even for the most dedicated gossip mongers. The waiter hovered nearby, unsure whether to serve the coffee or call security. I looked at the three of them, my mother's defiant denial, my sister's pathetic sobbing, and my father's broken silence, and realized that the bridge wasn't just burning, it was already ash. I didn't wait for the dessert to be served, nor did I stay to hear the excuses that I knew were bubbling up in my mother's throat. The air in the country club ballroom, once so refined, now felt thick with the stench of betrayal and decades of suppressed resentment. I began calmly packing my tablet and the manila folder back into my leather bag, my movements slow and deliberate. My father, Gregory, finally reached out, his hand trembling as he tried to touch my sleeve. Miranda, please, don't go like this. We can sit down tomorrow. We can figure out a way to fix the accounts. We're a family, after all. I pulled my arm back, not with anger, but with a profound, chilling indifference. We aren't a family, Dad. We are a collection of people who share a last name and a history of enabling a thief. You didn't care about fixing anything when I was the one being mocked for my career or my life. You only care now because your bank account is empty and your golden child's mask has shattered into 1,000 pieces. Beatrice looked up from Savannah's shoulder, her eyes red-rimmed but still flashing with that stubborn, elitist pride. If you walk out that door now, Miranda, don't bother coming back. You've humiliated us in front of our peers. You've chosen to be a stranger, so be one. We don't need your sanctimony. I was already a stranger to you, Beatrice, I replied, using her first name for the first time in my life. The gasp from the nearby table was audible, but I didn't blink. You stopped being my mother the moment you decided that Savannah's lies were more valuable than my truth. And as for the house, the one you're so proud of, I suggest you read the last page in that folder I left on the table. I watched the color drain from Gregory's face as he flipped to the final document. What is this? A lien? It's a notice of ownership transfer, I said, my voice echoing in the sudden, sharp silence. Savannah didn't just mortgage the house. She defaulted on the private loan she took out using a forged quitclaim deed with your signature. I bought that debt from the private lender 3 weeks ago. I'm not just your daughter anymore, Dad. I'm technically your landlord. And since you've made it clear where your loyalties lie, you have 30 days to find a new place for you and your golden child to live. I'm selling the property and donating the proceeds to a charity for victims of financial elder abuse. Savannah let out a strangled cry, but I was already turning away. I felt a hand on the small of my back, warm, steady, and familiar. Julian had entered the ballroom, his presence a calm anchor in the middle of the storm. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. He just took my bag and looked at my family with the pitying gaze of someone who had seen exactly what they were. Let's go. Miranda, Julian whispered. Our life is waiting in Seattle. I walked past the rows of stunned guests, past the weeping sister and the broken father, and the mother who still couldn't admit she was wrong. I didn't look back at the crystal chandeliers or the gold-rimmed china. As the heavy oak doors of the country club swung shut behind us, the cool night air hit my face, and for the first time in 33 years, I could finally breathe. The weight was gone. I wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. I was a woman who had finally reclaimed her own story. 6 months have passed since that night at the country club. and the silence that followed my departure has been the most peaceful sound I've ever heard. In the real world, especially in a state with strict financial fraud laws, actions have consequences that a mother's hug cannot fix. Savannah Franklin found that out the hard way when the district attorney's office caught wind of the forged documents I had handed over to my legal team. She is currently serving a 2-year sentence in a minimum security facility for grand larceny and identity theft. Her influencer career vanished overnight, replaced by a permanent criminal record and a mountain of civil lawsuits from the brands she defrauded. My parents, Beatrice and Gregory, didn't fare much better. Without my father's retirement fund and with their credit scores destroyed by Savannah's spending sprees, they were forced to vacate the family home. I didn't back down on the 30-day notice. I sold the property to a lovely young couple who actually appreciate the history of the house, and as promised, every cent of the equity went to a foundation supporting elderly victims of financial abuse. My parents now live in a modest 2-bedroom rental in a much less prestigious part of town, surviving solely on Gregory's small social security checks. Beatrice still tries to call me occasionally, usually when a bill is due, but her number remains blocked. I realize that family is a title earned through respect, not a biological right to be a parasite. Back in Seattle, my life with Julian is full of the quiet, genuine joy I once thought was impossible. My restoration business is thriving, and I no longer feel the need to hide my success or my happiness. I've learned that the greatest revenge isn't just exposing the truth. It's outgrowing the people who tried to keep you small. To anyone watching this, remember, you are not responsible for fixing people who are committed to breaking you. Sometimes, the only way to save yourself is to let the room go silent, turn around, and never look back. Your worth is not defined by their approval, but by the strength you find when you finally choose yourself.